Hey, good morning, everybody. Sarasota Tim. Welcome to the Crasher and Story Time. I was reading comments yesterday, and let me zoom in there a little bit. And I've got everything correct today. There's no microphone whatsoever. The furnace is off. It shouldn't come on because it's nor hot or cold outside. It's actually very warm because they... trying to lower this thing. They got this real weird weather system coming that's brought a warm front ahead of the cold front. So I'm comfortable in here. But let's get to it. Today's story is about when I had a sand rail. If you don't know what a sand rail is, some people call them dune buggies. But dune buggies, when I grew up and I heard of a dune buggy, it was like in the Beach Boy days. They had those little cool looking little dune buggies that rode on the beach. They had a Volkswagen motor. You could also go on the street with them. They had lights and, you know, fat, wide tires. And they were cool as heck. You still see them occasionally. That's a dune buggy. And they had that fiberglass fenders and the crazy colors they had. And when you saw one, you definitely turned and looked at it. It was really cool and different from a regular automobile. So when you think of a dune buggy, what I had was a sand rail. It's completely different. And what it was is in California, you are a desert rat. And when you live in San Diego, you have this kind of recreation. Unlike Florida, where there's just kind of the beaches and fishing, which is huge, and swimming pools and, you know, that kind of thing, lake fishing, Lake Okeechobee, and saltwater fishing, and boating is huge here. It's like the entire, you know, besides running and jogging and outside activities, that's kind of what goes on here. Let me zoom in a little. There we go. There's a little bit better picture. I want to cross my legs. In San Diego, the range of outdoor activity is much wider. You've got the mountains, you've got the desert, you've got huge waves year-round to surf. And then, besides the mountains, you can go just north of San Diego to San Bernardino, to Big Bear and Mammoth Mountain, and be in snow. You can go surfing and snow skiing in the same day. Now, the surfing, I did a lot too. I'll get into that on another story. I used to be a surfer, a longboarder. And while I was never really expert at it, I did it quite a bit. I loved it. And I'll talk about it sometime if you want to hear it. But today's story is about when I had a sand rail. I only had one. Unlike the motorcycles, I only had the one. And how I procured it was I was in my business, which I had for 35 years almost, doing advertising for automotive repair centers, selling little maintenance programs for like oil changes and tire rotations. It was a promotional gig to introduce new customers from the community or the surrounding neighborhood of an auto center to come in and get some free services done next to free. They paid $40 for the coupon, but they got like $400 worth of services, good for 1 year, to introduce them to the shop. And so this business that I had afforded me a very lucrative income because they were doing all the work. I kept all the money for the coupon, and the customers got all these services for $40. So it was win, win, win. And I did it for 35 years, and I did very well with it. And all the auto centers that I promoted did extremely well. While a few of them, there was exceptions. Most of them grew. They hired more people. They put in more equipment. It was all depending on how they treated people when the people came in to redeem these free services that they paid $40 for. But it included like 3 or 4 oil changes, and the first oil change more than paid for it. So it was really a great deal. The whole idea behind somebody giving you $40 was they were committed that they would go in and at least use it once, because if you give something for free to people on their windshield wiper or on their door, they'll look at it and go, yeah, I don't need it. But if they actually buy it, they're going to use it. And that's what the store, the auto center needed, is people at least just to come in and give them an opportunity to show them what they do. Why are we talking about this rather than the sand rail? All right, so I made a lot of money. Not a lot of money. I made all that I needed. I would work a few hours a day. All right, I only worked 2 hours. Most of the time, 1 hour. And I would sell a handful of these coupons for 40 bucks a piece. And I'd make myself a few $100 every single day I went out. And I had no debt. In fact, folks, I'll be very honest with you. My credit score is north of 800 now, and all that. I mean, I got more money in the bank. I'm older. My credit's better. Everything's better than it was. My life has gone up every year of my life. Although I've had tumultuous times, my life has gone up every year. Praise God. But in those years, even though I made good money, my credit wasn't the best. I had just come out of one marriage. I got into another marriage, and there were some personal things that happened, and we moved when the rent came due, and there was a lot of this other stuff that happened that prevented me from having like new cars and all that. But I made such good money in my business, I didn't need the credit. I had money to pay cash. So I paid for my car and motorcycle and all these things that I had. And I decided that I was living in this apartment complex, and I was married, and there was a guy that I got the sand rail from the same way I got the motorcycle. The guy on the motorcycle, wife was pregnant, and they were going to have a child, and they didn't need it anymore, and he wanted to, move on with his life. Well, the guy that had the sand rail that I bought, he had back issues, and believe me, you can't have back issues and ride in one of these sand cars. They are, rough. So he sold it to me, and I'm not a mechanic. I don't have tools. I don't fix anything. I needed a turnkey. I didn't need a fixer-upper. I didn't need any of that. I needed something that I could turn on and ride. And this is exactly what it was. And he gave me a great deal. In fact, I'll share with you a little more personal information regarding my credit and money. He wanted $5,000 for it. I didn't have $5,000. I had, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000. I can't remember. And I gave him that, and he allowed me, because he knew me and trusted me, to pay him, what was it, every 2 weeks or every month, so much, until I paid it off. And he gave me, I forgot how long the term was. It wasn't that long to get it paid off. And in the meantime, he actually gave me the sand rail. So what I got was the car, the sand rail, and a trailer that it went on. And it was really kind of a cool trailer that it just had the front tires go on this, kind of like a bike rack. It was just 2 tracks, and everything in the middle was kind of open. It was a very lightweight trailer, kind of custom made for it. Now, a sand rail has really wide, super wide back tires and super skinny front tires. I'll explain in a minute why, for the sand. So it was a kind of a ruby red, metallic, and what they look like, if you've ever seen one, is just a frame. It's pipes all welded together, and you're in this open frame. There's no body panels. You can see, you're sitting in a seat, you can see your legs, and everything goes straight down to the pedals, and everything is open. And it's just a Volkswagen motor that sits behind you, and you got these skinny tires in the front, these fat tires in the back, this big Volkswagen motor open, just exposed, and this big pipe that comes out, and it's beveled out at the end, kind of wider, that gives it that unique sound. The exhaust pipe, and it shoots straight up, and they're all the same. Back in this day, and I'll get into the future sand rails of what we have today, everybody had this style. It was, you know, depending on the different colors you got, but they were all like a welded frame with a roll bar that went over you. So when you sat in it, if you ever rolled over, you were really protected, because mine had like a NASCAR 5-point seatbelt, like the Simpson seatbelts. You put them over your shoulder, real wide, super like NASCAR. And they would come down to a buckle. You'd have the waist buckle, one that went between your legs. It's called a 5-point seatbelt. And if you were upside down, you would just be hanging in that seat, you know. And this roll bar, this structure that was built, the way they framed it, a pipe went over your head. So if you rolled over on a sand dune or out off a cliff or whatever, wherever you're riding off-roading with these things, you know, you wouldn't get your melon crushed. And you could ride around in a sandrail with, not that I recommend it, but you could ride around in short pants, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. And if you had a quad or a, what's the other word? We call them quads in California. Here they call them four-wheelers. They mainly use them for hunting and in the woods and stuff like that. But out there, they were quads. And I'll explain that too, because they use the same kind of tires for the sand as the sandrails did. So I had this sandrail with the 5-point seatbelt, and it had a 2180 Volkswagen motor. Now that's a big Volkswagen motor, and it had a Weber carburetor on it. This was what the guy sold me. It was turnkey, ready to go. Had a very unique sound. It was bad to the bone. It really was. A lot of these Volkswagen motors you can get were much smaller CCs, like 1300, 1500, 1600 or something like that. They didn't have a whole lot of giddy up. But back in those days when Volkswagen motors and Volkswagen Bugs were prevalent on the road, that's where they got these motors from. And you could literally pick up one of these motors out of a Volkswagen Bug and put it in a sandrail with your hands. I mean, some of them. So anyway, it was a very easy modification. I don't know who created them or whatever, but they were just thousands of them that run out there on the desert and the sand dunes, a place called Glamis. There was two places to go. There was, I lost my thought on one thing. I'll get back to it in a minute. There was two places to go when you left San Diego. You could go to Ocotillo Wells, which had not so much sand as it was trails and hard-packed hills, not mountains, but a lot of dirt bikes went there. These were also, oh, that's what I was going to say a minute ago. When I could wear a t-shirt and shorts and flip-flops, if you had a quad or a dirt bike, you had to don riding boots, riding pants, a helmet, gloves, all this protective gear, because if you went down or you came off your quad, you didn't have a roll bar or anything. You had to protect your body from breaking arms and crushing your head. And there's been plenty of accidents and airlifts out of the desert from crazy people. Usually alcohol was involved, acting and doing stupid things. But anyway, there were two places you could go. When you left San Diego, you could go to the first place, just on the other side of Julian, down the other side of the mountains, out I-10, and or I-8, I think it is. It was 8 north and south? And 10, yeah, it was 10. No, it was 8. Odd numbers go north and south. Even numbers go east and west, in case you didn't know that. So it was out I-8 to Yuma, and then it turns into 10 in Texas. Yeah, it was I-8. And I got you before you were going to tell me in the comments. I know you were going to correct me. A few people are watching these videos that know more than I do. They were telling me about living in San Diego and California in general. So anyway, you can go to Ocotillo Wells, or you can go to Glamis. Now, Ocotillo Wells was the trails and the hard-packed hills. With a lot of dirt bikes would go there, and they would air from one area to another. You know, they'd jump, and instead of just riding the trails, people started flying on these things. They were just air. They'd come off and jump over things. To guys on dirt bikes, I never learned how to ride like that, are amazing. And they got huge huevos. So But in Ocotillo Wells, if you took your sand rail, you had to have different tires. See, I had 2 sets of tires for my sand rail that the guy gave me. He put the package on me. I got the package deal. I had the Ocotillo Wells, the desert tires called desert tracks. And then I had the paddle tires for the sand dunes. You say, what's the difference? Well, a desert track tire, these are the rear tires only, those big fat wide tires I told you about. If you put desert tracks on, they had a ribbed, I don't want to say knobby because they weren't really knobbies. Like, do you know what knobby tires are? Like on dirt bikes and stuff? Or like, you know, these e-bikes that I got. But they had these ribs on them to give them, you know, bite on the trail, but they weren't paddles. And there was a very, very big difference. Okay, so if you want to ride around trails and go up those hard paths and stuff, kind of following the area where dirt bikes go and everything, you had to have desert tracks. And if you went to the sand dunes, which was really cool, you got paddles. What are paddles? Well, these tires you put on the back, same width, very wide, very, very low tire pressure. I'm talking 5, 10 pounds of pressure, maybe. But they were big volume, so, you know. They had this deep off the tire, flat, like fins, like flippers, like for your feet when you scuba dive, all the way around the tire. Paddles. You think of a paddle boat, a paddle wheel on an old river boat. That's exactly what they were. And it was designed because sand, if you don't have, you know, a paddle on there to push out the sand like pushing out water, it works the same method, really. You were just spinning, or you would dig down and get stuck. So you had to have paddle tires. Even guys with dirt bikes, 2-wheel dirt bikes that went to the sand dunes, they could buy paddle tires for their dirt bike in the rear. Big, giant fin about every few inches all the way around the tire that could literally paddle that sand and dig them and keep them on top. So when you go to this, when you go to the desert in Glamis, that would be right on the Yuma, California state line. The desert dune area there, let me explain it. When I say sand, I'm talking about not a blade, not a single blade of grass you could see for miles. There was no mix of sand and some grass and some anything. Sand. You've seen the movies, right? In Arabia or something where they have what they call sand bowls. What's a sand bowl? Imagine an ice cream cone with no ice cream in it. And you got a bowl, that cone, it gets real skinny down at the bottom. That's what they would have out there. The wind would create them. But they would be huge diameter. Some smaller, but most of them were huge. And you could ride sideways on these sand bowls and work your way up and down to the bottom of the sand bowl. Or you could try to just go straight up it. But if you came out of the sand bowl, the idea was, imagine the ice cream cone again. If you get to the rim, it just falls off, right? There's no level ground. It'd be another sand bowl. So if you didn't want to just come up straight and then air out and then endo straight down into the next one and get killed, you had to get to the top and you had to round yourself over into the next wall and go. So you'd be riding around, and then you get to the top, you're corkscrewing your way up, and then you would just literally kind of roll over into the next one and go down around that way. Because if you went straight up and over, you would go out. If you only went out 5 feet, there would be nothing but straight down to have a bad day. So, and it's happened to many. Those are called razorbacks, meaning, you know, you'd have a nice, smooth, round bowl or whatever, and then when you come out of it, it's just a flat, there wasn't even another bowl. That's what a razorback is. It's not even another bowl. It's just a flat side that if you don't come out cautiously and go sideways and work your way down, you're just nothing but air. Like driving off a cliff is exactly what it's like. Driving right off a cliff. So you had to know what you were doing. And we had buggy whips, these whips that went up to behind the sandrail or your bike or your quad, and they were mandatory because a whip you could see before you came up out of the bowl. A whip would be, heck, it'd be 15 feet above your car, your sandrail or your bike, and it would have a light on it. But mainly it had a flag, and so people could see these flags and these whips, you know, so we didn't run into each other. They were kind of like, you know, a marker. You know, hey, I see somebody coming, you know, because you can't see them until they come out of the bowl. So you'd have these whips. Everybody had to have a whip with a flag, a buggy whip. But a lot of them, if you bought an expensive one, it would have a light on the top of it with a globe. And at night, you can go and park on top of a sand dune with some other people and have yourself a beverage. Of course, we were drinking alcohol those days. Most people were. We'd carry a cooler with us, and we'd shut the engine off. We'd sit on top of a sand dune that you could only get to with this vehicle. You couldn't get there with anything else. You felt like you conquered something because you had this mean machine that could climb this sand like a boat going over water. And you'd get up there and you'd meet people and you'd turn on your buggy whip light and you'd have this big globe of light, like a spotlight, that came down maybe about 10 feet around your sandrail that illuminated it. And you could see them up there with their lights on, you know, up on the sand dunes, a couple of sandrails or 4 or 5 sandrails sitting up there. And it was cool. Now, at night riding, skipping around a little bit, our framed sandrail that was all open, remember, no body panels or anything. You could see the person in there sitting in the seat, and I'm going to describe a little bit more. We would have these big, remember KC lights? Guys used to put them on their trucks, up on their hood, near the windshield, up on their roof on a roll bar, and they could flip those on. They weren't legal on the street because you could blind somebody. But out in the desert where there's no, you got to see, right? We would have 6, 8 of these lights, 4 or 5 of them at least, on our sandrails. You'd flip a little toggle switch, and these huge, bright, these very bright, they were halogen, they weren't LED, lights would come on, and that would light up the desert, man. And we could see, and if you'd been riding during the day, you still needed local knowledge because it was extremely dangerous if you went over a razorback or you came out of a sand dune, a bowl, too aggressively, and you know. So anyway, what we would do is, let me back up a little bit. When you go to the desert, generally you always go with somebody else. It's kind of like scuba diving. You know, you never dive alone. You dive with a buddy. So people would get an RV, a Class A, a Class C, even I guess a truck with a camper shell. Most people had a full-on motorhome like a Class C. And they would pull either an enclosed trailer that would have their whole tool shop in there because things break. I'll get to that too. Things always break. And they would pull their sand car out and have a door that would go down the back of the trailer. And inside they would have air compressors. Some of these guys were outfitted, man. And they would go with 6, 8, 10, 12 other RVs. And when they arrived, here's what you do. You go in, remember wagon trains, how they made a circle to fight the Indians, or even when they, you know, just set up so it wasn't just a big long line. We would make a big circle, find a nice flat area that the motorhome could ride on before you get into the sand dunes. It'd be like an area when you come off the freeway there to park. And you'd see these big giant corrals of RVs where they had their buddies. And behind their RV would be their trailer, and then the next guy and the next guy. And in the middle, everybody would bring wood. There would be all this huge amount of wood in the middle, and they'd have a fire at night. And everybody had their chairs just outside their motorhome, you know, with their awning. And everybody shared in meals, or you just had your own. And if you needed help or something broke, several people would have, like I said, a regular auto center in these trailers to fix things. Because remember the sand bowls and the razorbacks and stuff I told you about? Even with all the experience in the world, guys get aggressive, they get to drinking too much or something, and these cars were very lightweight, aluminum frames, and their tie rods and all these things that connect the tires and wheels were very, very lightweight, not heavy steel stuff. It was designed so it wouldn't be too heavy in the sand, and they bend easy, and you can come off of something and land and break and bend, and then you're dead in the water. So guys would bring out their tow straps, and they would drag you back to the corral, the big circular wagon train we had, and they would break out the tools, and the guys would all get there together, and they'd put everything on hold for you, you know, and they'd fix you up, and, you know, everybody would do the same for everybody. And then you're back out there again later that day or the next day on the next ride. Now, speaking of that, while it's in my mind, there was a system to riding. Like I told you never ride alone, even though plenty of people are out there riding by themselves. Don't get me wrong. But the really cool way I was taught by some very experienced professional desert rats was I had a three-wheeler. Remember three-wheelers? That's what I went out there with my truck. Actually, I had a car, and I pulled a little trailer behind it with an ATC three-wheeler. Dangerous little things, but they could go anywhere too. So I met these guys. They took me under their wing. They all had sand rails. I was always so envious. I was like, man, you get a dirt bike, you get a quad, you know, you're one type of person out there in the desert. But if you get a motorhome and you get a sand rail, you're at the top. Then it's just a matter of who's got the nicer motorhome and the nicest sand rail. But once you get a sand rail and a motorhome, you're at the top. So I met these guys. They took me under their wing. They took me out for a ride. And they were like professionals, man. They had really built their motors to incredible power. Volkswagen motors too. And I'll get to the newer type sand rails in a minute. But they took me under the rail. And here's what they taught me about riding. They had a system where you would leave the corral and the guy that led, and then there was a guy at the back. And then all the people in between, let's say there was 10 of them. You would be behind the same person every day that you left that place and went out and rode. You didn't do on your own. You didn't go to the front. You didn't go to the back. You didn't switch with the guy behind you. You waited when everybody was leaving. Everybody was sitting there and like, okay, there's the guy I follow. And you went behind him. And there's a reason for that. And that is, we had to wear goggles and a scarf. Because you can imagine, remember those paddles? That throws up sand. And when guys are taking their turn to go up a hill and another guy is going to follow him, you got to wait a second so you don't eat all of his sand. But it happens. And if you don't have goggles and a scarf, God help you. Because you're going to eat sand. And so you follow the guy, and the reason for it is if you're going and you don't see the guy behind, we had mirrors, and you don't see the guy behind you anymore, like something happened, you stop because he needs help. He needs to be towed, he broke or something. And when the guy in front of you sees that you stop because you don't see the guy behind you, he stops. And then the next and the next and then all the way to the front. Now, everybody, it's like road language without, you know, having CBs or anything. They're like, oh, something happened. Everybody turns around. Everybody comes back to see what happened. Either somebody that tried to make the hill, stopped halfway up, rolled over, buried himself in the sand. And, you know, it was easy to get these guys out with help. You know, people would get out of their car and he could push, or we had a tow strap, a snatch rope, a kinetic rope that would be like a rubber band. And you could just get going with about 10 feet of slack and snatch them right out. Or we could just get out and lift them out, you know, because 3 or 4 guys can do it. They're not that heavy. But by yourself, you're stuck, you're stuck. So that's what the reason of following behind the same person every day. And you didn't break that rule. And then, so we'd go out and I was riding with these guys. They took me under their wing. This is before I got mine. I'm skipping back before I got mine. This is what made me want to buy one, actually. I went out there with my three-wheeler, and these guys, like I said, took me under their wing, and they were kind of making fun of me and laughing at me because I had a little three-wheeler, you know, a little ATC, and these guys were, you know, they were the upper class. You know, they had and I mean, these guys all did have, this particular group I met, they didn't just have the regular Volkswagen motors. And believe me, there's a lot of sandrails out there that are just, I don't want to say jalopy, but they're just run-of-the-mill sandrails. They do it, but these guys had performance sandrails, and they were all gearheads, I guess. They knew what they were doing. Plus, they knew how to cook. They put the big bonfire in the middle. They did everything like textbook of how to have a good time. And I believe this weekend that I met them was Memorial Weekend. And what Memorial Weekend is a very hot weekend. It's the finale. It's the finale because you don't want to go to the desert after Memorial Weekend because you'll melt your engine. It's, you know, triple-digit temperatures out there. So desert season starts in November, Thanksgiving. That's the kickoff. And if you go on YouTube and put in Glamis, Glamis, and just take a look at what's evolved in the last 30 years of going there. It was all these Chenoweth frames, that's what they called them, with Volkswagen motors, to now you have famous multi-millionaire guys going out there with, you know, extreme $100,000 plus big V8 motors, and they're not Volkswagens, with all this fancy travel, expensive suspensions. They can ride wheelies for a mile. They have so much torque. It's insane what it turned into. But back in my day, man, it was cool. You know, we just had the Volkswagens. Very few people showed up out there. Some guys had Corvair motors in theirs. You'd hear them and you'd see them. They were a flathead or something, whatever the Corvair motor was. And then they would have, some guys had these V8s. They put in like a, what was it? Like one guy had like a Lincoln motor in his, and he mounted it in the front. He mounted it in the front. Most of all the sandrails all have motors that sit behind you. And these had, you know, motors in the front. There was a few of them starting to pop up, these new ideas. But everybody basically had a Volkswagen. Now, when you go out to Glamis, they had names of these sandhills to climb. And one was called Oldsmobile. And Oldsmobile was a mountain. You would not believe, folks, you would not believe how high and how steep some of these sand dune mountains are out there. At the foot of it would be hundreds, if not thousands, of other sandrails and four-wheel drive vehicles and quads and dirt bikes, the whole array of off-road vehicles with paddle tires, watching just at the base. And you would hear, you know, different ones going up several areas up Oldsmobile sand dune. And if you got to the top, you know, you were something. If you didn't have enough power, what you would do is you would turn, before you lost all your momentum, turn quickly and point the thing back downhill, or go sideways and kind of downhill, and keep in the gas so you can eventually turn straight down so you don't roll over. And that reminds me, they had brakes on these sandrails that a left and a right, like a tractor. You know how a tank works, where you can stop one track and the other track keeps going, and that turns like an excavator. But tractors had them too. Well, we had those kinds of brakes on the sandrail. You could pull when you're going up the mountain, up the sand dune, and you know, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. But you didn't have enough power even to turn. You could pull this one brake, say on the left, and that tire would stop, and the tire on the right would keep going, and that would get you turned around quicker. And so these were techniques that you had to know, and a system you had to use for that situation. I hope that made sense to you, because that would happen a lot. The guys would just go and go, like, I think I can make it, I think I can make it, and then they can't, but they didn't even have enough power to turn without like, you know, or going sideways and rolling. And, you know, even if you got a 5-point seatbelt, it's extremely dangerous. I mean, especially this Oldsmobile. I mean, that thing was, I don't know, it had to be 1,000 feet. It was a mountain. It was tall. It took a while to get to the top, and it got steeper. So anyway, you'd have this brake you could use, left or right, depending on which way you want to turn. You'd lock up that one tire, the other tire would keep going, and that'd get you around. All right, so you go to Oldsmobile, and all these people were down here at the base. Then they started having sand drags. These were cars that came out there that had nothing but power. And there was a flat area, like a Bonneville Salt Flats out there in Glamis, where people could ride, you know, straight away, and they would race. And people would be lined up on both sides. You know, they'd have like 100 yards in between or 80 yards in between the two rows of cars, all the way down. Cars, bikes, trucks, and stuff like that. I should say trucks, not cars. That were just watch these guys racing, these sand drags. And that was amazing. You know, backing up to the very beginning, when I started going out there, it was free. Yep, they started charging. It was free. You just went out there, you pulled off the freeway, you were in Glamis. There was a little there was a little store there where you could pick up stuff. You know, if you needed some supplies, you always brought everything you needed though. But if you needed something, you know, you could get it at this little store, fuel, that kind of thing. And you could just go anywhere you want out there. Just pick you up a spot, squat. And then the state started thinking, hey, thousands and thousands of people are going out there. Look at Glamis on YouTube on Thanksgiving or New Year's and see the amount of people that are out there. It's like ants running all around. That's why you need those buggy whips, because they're just willy-nilly running anywhere and everywhere, just any direction. It's nuts. But yet, remember, it's just miles and miles of open desert. So generally with the buggy whip and all that, you can, you know, avoid running into somebody. But as soon as the government and the state found out that people were going there by the thousands and having fun, they were like, how can we tax that? How do we get a little bit of that fun and charge people? And that's exactly what happens. As soon as they get a whiff of what people want to do, that's why going to special events and everybody goes in their car and they need a place to park, we'll just charge for parking, you know, and all that. So, yes, they started charging. And you're like, well, how are they going to enforce that? I'll tell you how they enforce it. You had to have a sticker or a little paper or whatever that went on the dash of your vehicle that towed your off-road vehicle there. And so wherever you were camped at. And so police would drive around on quads, four-wheelers, you know, gun and badge and the whole thing. And they would go around looking for your off-road decal. I think that they ended up having, like today, where you can buy annual, you can have day passes, whatever. But they were looking for, make sure you paid to go to this open desert, this land where there's nothing there, no cars, no pedestrians, no businesses, nothing in the way, not bothering anybody. It's just an open, free land, but not free no more. Not free anymore. Not to the state of California. They're like, no, you got to pay us to come out here. And that's been going on for years now. But back in my day, there was no such thing. It was coming in there at the end. I started hearing about it. But when I went out there, I never had to pay a penny. And so I took my sandrail after I met these guys. I bought that one that was turnkey, my red 2180 Volkswagen. And I had a unique sound. Mine, there was a little baffle or something down the pipe. I took that out. It gave it a kind of a unique sound. People were telling me, oh, we know that Baker's coming because we can hear his sandrail. It was very distinguished. I mean, I've been very lucky. My Harley was cool. I had a little cam put in it. It had a little loping sound that when I was at a red light, that it idled because it had a cam in it. And I had these, you know, these certain exhaust system on it. One had Reinhardt's, another one had Rush exhaust, maybe it was. Anyway, my sandrail also had a very unique sound, and it was a cool look. And also my buggy whip light, I had this amber colored globe. Sometimes I would switch it out to red, but most people had the white one because they wanted the most light, you know, when they stopped and parked or whatever. But I had my, let me just finish up the video. Oh, I'm only 40 minutes. I bought a Class C motorhome when I bought the sandrail. I was married and I was living in an apartment and I was selling the coupons. Shortly after that, that marriage ended, but it took a long time for that marriage to end. There was a lot of back and forth. You ever been in one of those where you think it's over and you split up and then you go back and then you think the milk that is sour is fresh again and you go back and you never learn that once milk is sour, you can put it back in the refrigerator all you want. It's never going to be fresh again. Well, we wanted to make it fresh again, so we tried over and over, but to no avail. So when that relationship ended and I bought the sandrail, I decided to buy a motorhome and live in it. And so I lived in Escondido, California. It's the North County of San Diego, right off the I-15. And I lived in a RV resort. And it had a beautiful frontage. And different neighbors were coming in every few days. It had a swimming pool, had a rec room, a community room with a big flat screen TV to sit there with sofas and read and watch TV, so you don't have to sit in your RV all the time. It could bring people together. You can meet people. And I lived there on a month-to-month basis. A lot of people did that too, but a lot of them, half of the park, were people just traveling. They were there for a day, a week, 3 or 4 days, whatever. And, you know, so you always had new neighbors coming in. It was kind of cool. And it was a beautiful place that it wasn't like they allowed, you know, those, some campgrounds, you know, they have no level of security. They just let anybody and anybody come in them. This one, you know, you're not going to get away with being in there with some broken down jalopy or doing drugs or something like that. It was a nice place. And I had a cement slab right outside where my awning came out. When I lived there and I ended that relationship, I had a sandrail. I had my Goldwing 1500. I had a 4-wheel drive Ford truck. I had my Honda Accord. And I had my Class C motorhome. I had 5 vehicles. I told you I made some good money. I bought everything used, and I was storing the sandrail at an outside storage place. The car and the truck and the motorcycle were right there. I had 2 car spots in front of my Class C motorhome that I lived in. And then I had my Goldwing I could squeeze in on the side over there with a cover over it. And then my awning was out, and I had chairs, I had a grill, and I had this Class C motorhome. My Class C motorhome was bitchin' too. I had this one that had a rear bath, and it was really, really nice. When I took that out there to the desert with my sandrail, it had a stereo system in it that could crank. I had TV. It had a generator that could run my air conditioning and power all the electricity I needed to watch TV and listen to stereo. I was cooking steaks and burgers, and my sandrail was parked right outside, and the generator would be running. And this is what I would do. Now, I was a wild one then. I drank, and I was out there by myself most of the time, pretty much all the time. I would go out and make some money, sell those things, those oil change cards. I would go down to the gas station. I'd buy some 93 octane. And I would also go to buy this AV fuel, this airplane fuel, this very high, 110 octane. And I'd mix it with 92 or 93, and it worked out to like 100 octane. And that's what I put in my sandrail, and it loved it. It loved it. So I had all these big gas cans, like these, not your typical red gas can. There were these ones with this big fat hose that you could pour out real fast. Anyway, I had several gallons of gas that I would carry with me. I'd load up the sand rail on the trailer behind my Class C motorhome. I'd put my awning in. I'd leave my RV park in Escondido. And when I was there working, selling my coupons and stuff, I'd go out for a couple hours, like I say, sell, come home. I met a guy that actually lived in there too. He liked to play golf. I was into golf. We'd go to the golf course and play golf. And it was just, you know how California looks. Blue sky, always blue sky, never a cloud, perfect weather, 70, 75 degrees and fair every day. Just amazing. Low humidity. The weather is so impressive in California that you can't help from noticing it every second of every day. Kind of like when you live in South Florida, when it's hot and humid, you're noticing it every second of every day. Well, on the contrary, you were noticing how fantastic it was. And, you know, it was just like, just amazing. I miss it so much. Anyway, I'd go play golf. I was living the life, man. I'd go out, sell a few of those coupons, make myself a pocket full of hundreds, come back, grill a steak, make a burger, whatever, have some cocktails, hit the golf course with my buddy over there. We played golf all the time. Then come like Wednesday or Thursday, I started getting the bug to go to the desert. I'd put the awning in, pull the Class C out, head over to the storage lot, hook up the trailer, and you could pick it up and move it. It was a way you could literally pick it up and move it and hook it on the back of the ball, load up all my groceries, all my booze, all my gas, and here I go to Ocotillo Wells generally, not Glamis. I was more of the desert guy with the desert tracks. I did do Glamis a few times, but it was a lot more of Ocotillo Wells than it was Glamis. And that was a little closer too. So here I go. I get there. I'd find me a spot. There'd be like these tumbleweed bushes around and like trails. I kind of like riding in that more. It was more exploratory than just the open sand dunes and the big bowls and all that. And because I was solo and I didn't go with people, you know, and I wanted to be safe, I just did Ocotillo Wells. And there was plenty of people to meet. They'd be out there riding around on dirt bikes and quads, and they didn't need paddle tires either because it was compact hard. So let me tell you this little short story about Ocotillo Wells and how I broke my sand rail all the time. So I get out there with my my Class C motorhome, and I'd be inside. I had a little booth. It was such a cool motorhome. I had a bed that goes over the cab. You know what a Class C is? They have that bed that's over the top of the cab of the van. They have a van nose, and that's where the bed is in these Class Cs. Now, today they make them where they're inside and in the back or whatever, but mine was over top. And it was a big bed. It was a soft bed. It was comfortable. And it had a little window in the front, too. You could look out with a curtain. It was so bitchin'. I just loved living in that thing. It was just the greatest thing in the world. And I only paid $500 a month in Escondido at this RV park on a monthly rate. $500. And I had washer and dryer right outside the door. You know, you pay for that. The rec room, a free swimming pool, and it was just beautiful. The landscaping was gorgeous. The weather was gorgeous. I was on top of the world. But when I would go out to the desert in Ocotillo, and I would get out of that, I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd have my meal at night. I'd been riding all day. I'd hit the hay, and then I'd wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd look out there. And if you went out to the desert on a full moon, it was like all those little tumbleweed bushes were casting shadows. The moonlight was so bright. It was like a sun. You could see. You could just see. You didn't even need lights hardly. But I had those lights. So I would say, shoot, I'm going to go for a ride. And I would. I'd jump in my sand rail. I'd put on my 5-point seatbelt harness. All I had on was a pair of tennis shoes or flip-flops. It was warm, of course. So I was just wearing, I probably had pants on. I didn't wear short pants. And just a shirt. You know, and I'd strap on my little they call it a 6-pack cooler. You had these little small coolers. And I had a little framed out thing right behind the driver's seat that it sat on with a couple of bungee cords that snapped over it. Everybody had the same thing. And you just snap that on there and you throw you some beers, sodas, bottles of water, whatever it is you wanted to drink in there with some ice. And off you go. And I just jumped in there. I fired it up. There was no noise ordinance. Nobody cared. Everybody was doing it. You'd hear somebody else out there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They were going 24 hours a day. So I'd take off and I'd go up to Ocotillo Wells had this famous little spot, this only one sandy spot called Blow Sand. You can even see it. Every time you fly into San Diego on an airplane, the flight path takes you over Ocotillo Wells, and you can literally see, because it's yellow, that sand, that one hill that is, you know, small in comparison to Oldsmobile and the dunes in Glamis, but you could see it when the plane started descending, coming into San Diego. I've seen it many times flying in there. And anyway, you go up to Blow Sand, and that was kind of like my favorite thing, is to ride up Blow Sand. You go down the hill, you go up the hill, over and over and over, down this big thing. And then they had, this is why I broke. I'm gonna get into this. When I would go up to Blow Sand 3 o'clock in the morning, I would take a Duraflame log. I would strap that to the top of my 6-pack cooler. You know what a Duraflame log is? It's in paper. You light the bag, and it lights for 2 to 4 hours. I would light a Duraflame on the sand. You can just drop it in the sand and sit there and drink your beer or drink whatever. It was beer for me in those days. And you would sit there and just, I-8 was right out there. You could hear and see these semis coming for like 3 miles away. You could hear them, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning with those big stacks, those big pipes they got, you know, coming down the freeway. And you're sitting on top of this sand dune, and you got your beer, and you got your Duraflame log going there. It's warm, it's not cold or anything. And you're just sitting there in your sand buggy or sitting on the tire and doing whatever you wanted to do, thinking your thoughts and looking out there. And you're like, man, the only way I could be here, the only way anybody could be what I'm doing right now is if they have a sand rail, a Duraflame log, and a 6-pack of beer, and you could be here. Otherwise, you can't get here. I own this. And it was just cool. And I did that many times at 3 o'clock in the morning. And something was reminding me, because someone wrote in the comments the other day about Glamis. On the other side of the road, there was another sand dune area that was called Gordon Wells. I didn't want to leave that out. I'm sure the person watching is like, there you go, Tim. Gordon Wells and Glamis were two of the same, but Gordon Wells might have had some blades of grass in it, but it was still sand dunes. And they were like right across the street, almost from one another, very close proximity. The Colorado River ran down between these places in Glamis. The Colorado River. The Colorado River is also a famous place that people in California would go in the summer and float down the river, you know, on big tire tubes. Yeah, with a 6-pack of beer, or they'd drag them in the water because the water was pretty darn cold. But people used to jump over that Colorado River on their dirt bikes. Even I've seen some sand rails that had these great suspensions do it. But anyway, I forgot about the Colorado River. And earlier when I was talking about Memorial Weekend, you didn't go there anymore. Now it was going to Big Bear to go snow skiing or camping or whatever up in the mountains, or surfing in the summer in the ocean because it was just too hot to go to the desert. You stayed away from there. But from Thanksgiving to Memorial Day, and Memorial Day was the real hardcore people that went because it was already hot. We already know that Memorial Day is like super hot, but it was like the finale. So anyway, so backing up, I'm in Ocotillo Wells at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting up there with my fire and my beer in one hand and maybe something else in the other in those days too. And you know, I'd go back to the RV and go back to sleep, or I'd sit up. You just do what you wanted to do, just riding around. Oh, how I broke. When you come down off of blow sand and you get down to the flat area of this, where you'd go for a little ways, where this little route was that you'd make a U-turn and come back and then cruise up blow sand to the other side again and come around, kind of like a track. There was this ribbed area called whoop-de-doos, or whoops for short. It was like a washboard. Imagine the old washboard where you wash your clothes. It was like speed bumps. Every, I don't know, 2 feet, big, huge, rounded speed bumps for 100 yards. And if you didn't go across those at the right speed, here's what would happen. You would start bucking. Just imagine going over something like that too fast in a car or anything. Just imagine what would happen. You're going to be doing this. This is how I broke my sand rail. I lost how many times I broke my ring and pinion. The rear end gear, that round thing on the rear end of any car, is called a ring and pinion. It's where the gears mesh together that turn the wheels. And if you go over the whoop-de-doos and those big tires I mentioned that you have on the back of your sand rail, if they come off the ground, remember they're big tires, they're big circumference. So the ring and pinion in the rear end takes a lot of low gearing to turn those big tires. But as soon as they come off the ground, they pick up speed real quick because of the low gearing. And then what happens, if you're bouncing up, because they're like balloons, remember they had low air pressure, they could bounce. If you hit the whoop-de-doos too fast in a sand rail and the back end started bucking and the back end came up and the rear tires picked up speed suddenly and then came down and planted, and that rear end would snap because a lot of torque would happen quickly and the tires would pick up speed if you didn't leave them on, if you didn't keep them on the ground. And as soon as you got in the air, and when it came down and bit, it was too much on those low, small gears, and it would shave. It would just, the teeth, it would just shear them. And you wouldn't go. You were dead in the water. You couldn't move. Your rear end, your ring and pinion, shot, broken. So, it took me a long time to learn this. So I put it on the trailer, and there's nothing worse than breaking and not having a way to fix it and trying to stay the rest of the weekend. Nope, not happening. I don't think anybody stayed. I think everybody that ever broke, they were so bummed watching everybody out there riding around having a good time, and all you are now is sitting at your motorhome or whatever, which was all part of it, but without the toy, it's no good. So pack up your toys and roll up your lip, you're pouting, and go home. And go home with all that extra fuel you didn't burn, go home with all the food you didn't eat, all the beer you didn't drink, and go to the fix-it shop. So I found me a fix-it shop. And remember, I was making pretty good money, and all I would do is, because I didn't know how to fix it, I would take it in, and he would buy a new ring and pinion. I think they came out of Volkswagen buses. Remember the Volkswagen vans? They called them a bus. That's where this particular ring and pinion that I needed, seemed like I remember in the story, came from. Well, they were running out, finding these gears for all these sand rails that were being produced by people by the thousands that were going out to the desert. It became so popular in San Diego, LA, up and down Southern California, to go to the desert and play with these sand cars that the people that had Volkswagens before it evolved into those $100,000 vehicles with the different engines, that rear ends and Volkswagen motors in itself were hard to find. So I would go, it would cost me $500 every time, and I would just leave the guy an open check. I'm just being facetious there. I'd just say, fix it. Just have it ready to go by next Friday, by the next weekend. Because I made money, and I wanted it fixed. I wanted to play. I was hooked. I was a desert rat. I loved it. I went out there more times than I can count, folks. And I broke that rear end, that ring and pinion, probably 3 times before I figured out what I was doing wrong, and maybe he told me. And it really got to the point where I couldn't even go the next weekend or two. He could not find this gear. He had to have them shipped from LA. He was going online, or in those days, I don't even know if we had online, but he was finding them somehow through his network and calling other stores to get these parts shipped. And then what they would actually have to do to make these gears work even better, and you gearheads out there are going to understand what I'm talking about, because I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do. You would actually file each gear, those teeth that meet together. You know, imagine inside of a watch. You know how they have those gears that mesh together? And that's the way the rear end is in the rear end of a vehicle. They would file those so that they would mesh real good and take out all the little rough edges, because I guess they were being reassembled into different rear ends and whatever, and that was just something you could pay a little extra to have them like filed. So after 3 or 4 times of having to pack up my stuff and go home and breaking my car, and a couple of times it happened like quickly, and that was a super bummer. And that was the first time I'm like, well, what happened? I don't even know what's wrong with it. Of course, then after like the 3rd time, I knew what happened. I broke that again. When are you going to learn that the whoop-de-doos are going to break your car? You can't go fast over them. You got to go like this, real slow. And anyway, when I left San Diego and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, I sold my sandrail. I had the Class C motorhome, and I sold both of them to the first 2 different people, to the first person that looked at it. The sandrail, I think I sold for what I gave for it. I lost all the money I spent in gas and the repairs to it, but I got exactly what I paid for it. So, you know, the cost of using it wasn't that bad. I was happy with that. And then the Class C motorhome was it was an old Ford. I think it was in 1982 with the rear bath. It had a very unique floor plan, kind of like the unique floor plan I have in my Crasher here, this Flagstaff 25 FKBS microlight made by Forest River. It's a very unique floor plan. It's not going to be very difficult to sell at all. Anybody looking for a camper? Well, the RV sold, so I sold the RV, I sold the sandrail, and I wanted to leave San Diego. I was kind of, without going into all my personal stuff, I was ready to move on, and I went to Atlanta. But I arrived in Atlanta with thousands of dollars in my pocket because I had sold those vehicles, and you know, I had the title to them all. And then the rest is history. I'll give you guys some more stories from when I lived in Atlanta and I worked, and you know, that's when I had the motorcycles and did things, and some other stories that I've done when I surfed, places I lived in San Diego, and the weather there and all the different areas, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stories, but yeah, you get a lot of stories and you could be like 65 because, you know, I'm going to be 70 in 5 years. But that was the sandrail story. I enjoyed it very much. I always tell people, when you live on the East Coast over here, there's just certain things that you can only do in the West. That's why I want to take the camper and see the West again. Even though I'm not going to get a sandrail, I miss that desert. And you just don't have desert here. There's no sand dunes. It's different. You know, we got a diverse country. You can only find that there. And I spent so much of my time out there, and I loved it. You could see out for miles, and then you get the deserts in the background. I mean the mountains in the background. And while North Carolina and Georgia mountains are awesome and all that for motorcycle riding and just, you know, nice people and barbecue and all the stuff that goes along with the Southeast, it's not the desert Southwest. And they're 2 distinct things. And I like them both. And I'm just yearning. It's been many years since I've been back west, and it's way, way overdue. So I hope and pray, if that's God's will, that my travels will take me with this camper out there. And if it's nothing else, just to camp and see and hike trails and walk. I don't care that I don't have a sand rail. I hope to see them and video them and all that kind of thing. But I have no way of, you know, well, you never say never, but, you know, with getting another motorcycle or a quad or even a sand rail, I guess that's possible. And let's say I wanted to take up roots out there and stay there, you know, but who knows what the future is going to bring. But while I have still a lot of ambition and a lot of adventure still in me, and I'm going to want to do these things, and the list is long. I mean, I have a long list of bucket list items that I'd like to do. And so while I'm able to do that, and while I'm able to continue to crush it, that's exactly what I hope to do. And just as long as, you know, I'm able, I have the finances, I have the ability, I keep my, you know, overhead low, and, you know, whatever God blesses me with and brings into my life, and friends and different things like that, that can afford me to go to different places, then I certainly will. And I hope to bring all that to you. And those that can't do it or haven't done it, you can live vicariously through me, through some actual events that I hope to do in the future. And then we'll continue the series on some stories, if you like, of talking to you about some of the things that I've done that can give some of those that are younger, that are up and coming, ideas of where you can go and things you can do, and some tips on anything that I can share. Just like I did this morning about the tip on your iPhone setting, about turning off record in stereo so you don't lose your microphone sound when you zoom in on something. So anyway, guys, today I'm going to get out there. It's going to be daylight in a couple of hours. There's a bad weather system coming in today. It's going to crush us all if we're not careful. And I'm going to pull these slides in. I may move my camper and go south. I may just pull the slides in and go south myself, or somewhere in the area around here that's safer than sitting in here. And I've got insurance, and I'm just going to pray and hope that God's going to provide and His will be done. So get out there today and crush it, everybody.